In the world of music, one of the biggest questions of 2025 remains: where is Susan Boyle now? After all, how does someone go from complete obscurity to stepping onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent and delivering one of the most unforgettable performances that show has ever seen, only to seemingly vanish as if it were all a dream? But Susan didn't just sing "I Dreamed a Dream," she lived it. With that first note, she stunned the world. Overnight, she went from a quiet, ordinary life in a small Scottish town to becoming a beloved global sensation. Since that breathtaking debut, Susan has gone on to release albums, tours internationally, and inspire millions with her voice and unwavering spirit. And yet, the spotlight eventually moved on. Cameras turned to the next big thing, and it began to feel like Susan was just another remarkable story lost to time. She deserved so much more. Susan Boyle was born on April 1st in the early 1960s, in a modest hospital in the village of West Lothian, Scotland. She was the youngest of 9 children in a working-class family. Her mother, Bridget, was in her late 40s when she became pregnant, a risky age to carry a child at the time. Doctors warned her of serious dangers to both her and the baby, but Bridget, deeply rooted in her faith, refused to terminate the pregnancy. The Boyle family lived in a small house in Blackburn. They had little money, and another child only stretched their resources thinner. From early on, Susan felt like she didn't quite belong, a feeling that would shadow her for much of her life. Her birth was traumatic. Susan was deprived of oxygen for a brief but critical period. Doctors later informed her parents that she had sustained mild brain damage. At home, however, the effects were more visible. Her father, Patrick, a World War II veteran, had returned from the war, a different man, angry, unstable, and haunted. The household, already cramped and poor, became a tense and sometimes frightening place. Susan, as the youngest and most vulnerable, was often caught in the crossfire. She suffered both physical and emotional pain, though she would later speak with compassion about her father, saying she believed he was fighting battles within himself that he couldn't control. School was no escape. The label of mental disability followed her from a young age. Teachers called her a slow learner, and few made any effort to support her needs. Her classmates mocked and bullied her, making school another place where she felt misunderstood and left behind. Susan often felt like she didn't belong. Every day at school, she was bullied. She suffered from epilepsy, which caused her to faint, an already frightening condition, made worse by cruel classmates who laughed at her when it happened. They called her names like Susie, simple and touchy, mocking her differences. The teachers didn't defend her. In fact, some of them used corporal punishment, hitting her with belts sometimes nearly every day. It was a dark and painful chapter in her life. Sadly, things didn't get easier as she grew older. In her mid-20s, Susan fell in love for the first time. But just as quickly as the relationship began, it ended without her even knowing why. Her father had answered the phone one day and told the man that Susan didn't want to speak to him. She never had a chance to explain or say goodbye. Not long after, he had a child with someone else. The heartbreak ran deep. It left a lasting scar and shaped the way Susan would view love and trust for the rest of her life. While her 8 siblings eventually moved out and started families of their own, she took on the role of caregiver, first for her father, until his passing, then for her aging mother, Bridget. Susan dedicated her life to caring for her, remaining by her side until Bridget passed away at the age of 91. During those years, Susan's world became smaller and smaller. She rarely went out, had few friends, and quietly gave up on her own dreams to serve her family. As her siblings built careers and created lives beyond Blackburn, Susan stayed behind, nearly invisible. For decades, Susan lived with the belief that she had brain damage caused by complications during birth. It was a diagnosis that had followed her all her life, reinforced by teachers, doctors, and even family. But everything changed when she received a new diagnosis: Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. Not only did this replace the old narrative, but it also came with a shocking revelation. Susan's intelligence was actually above average. The misunderstanding had cast a long shadow over her life. But now she finally had clarity. For the first time, Susan could see herself clearly, without shame, without stigma. In the late 1990s, she recorded a cover of Cry Me a River for a charity. CD only 1,000 copies were made, but a local newspaper praised her voice, calling her performance heartbreaking. Still, almost no one outside her town heard it. Out. That same year, Susan poured her savings into creating a demo tape, singing Cry Me a River and Killing Me Softly with his song. She mailed the recordings to music producers and TV shows across the UK. No one replied. The silence crushed her. It felt like no one wanted to hear what she had to offer. Then, tragedy struck again. In the early 2000s, Susan's beloved sister Kathleen died unexpectedly. Kathleen had always been Susan's biggest supporter, the one person who constantly pushed her to sing and believe in herself. The loss was devastating. Overwhelmed by grief, Susan stopped singing altogether. For 2 long years, she abandoned music completely. No lessons, no performances, no practice. Her sister's voice, the one that had always encouraged her to share her own, was gone. And with it, Susan's will to sing disappeared too. Eventually, she found her voice again, though things were different now. Her focus had returned to caregiving, this time for her elderly mother who needed constant support. In their small home, Susan cooked, cleaned, and kept watch over Bridget. In return, Bridget gave Susan something priceless: hope. You have a gift, and you must use it, she would tell her daughter. That belief kept Susan going. It was the last spark that kept her dream alive. Even when the rest of the world had forgotten her. Wanting to take a risk, Susan auditioned for a television show called My Kind of People. It was her first real opportunity to be seen by a national audience. But she didn't make it on air. The rejection was painful. Still, she didn't give up. She kept singing at home, at church, at small local events. She carried the dream quietly but fiercely. Then in 2007, another devastating loss shattered her world. Bridget, Susan's mother and greatest champion, passed away at 91. With her gone, Susan felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. The house was empty. Her purpose felt lost. She stopped singing again, this time for nearly 2 years. She barely left the house. Friends and neighbors grew concerned. The bright, quirky woman they had once known seemed to fade into silence and grief. After her mother passed, Susan's will to do anything seemed to vanish. The dream she had carried for so long faded into the shadows of grief. The house that was once filled with music, laughter, and love became a place of silence and sadness. Susan withdrew completely. Her small home in Blackburn became her entire world. Curtains stayed drawn. Days passed without her speaking to anyone. The only soul she shared her time with was her cat Pebbles. She stopped going to church. She no longer cared about social events, or even about how she looked. The vibrant presence she had once been dimmed into near invisibility. But in that darkness, something small and steady began to stir. A promise she had made to her mother tugged at her heart. Before Bridget died, Susan had vowed to try just once more to share her voice with the world. In 2008, she decided to honor that promise. She would audition for a television show called Britain's Got Talent. At the time, she was 47 years old. She had no job, no formal training, and had never performed outside her small community. But that didn't stop her. She filled out the application, traveled to Glasgow, and walked into the audition room, scared, unsure, but determined. I wanted to prove to myself and to everyone else that I could do it, Susan later said. That single, courageous decision would change her life forever, become one of the most iconic moments in entertainment history. When Susan stepped onto the stage at the Clyde Auditorium in Glasgow in April 2009, the room was filled with skepticism. She wore a simple gold lace dress. Her hair was unstyled, and she didn't look like someone about to change the world. The audience chuckled. The judges Simon Cowell, Amanda Holden, and Piers Morgan exchanged doubtful looks. And when Susan said she dreamed of becoming as famous as West End star Elaine Paige, the crowd practically scoffed. But then she sang. Susan opened with, "I dreamed a dream," from Les Miserables. And within seconds, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter, stopped. Simon's jaw dropped. Amanda's eyes widened. Piers leaned forward, mesmerized. The room was spellbound. Her voice strong, soaring, and full of heartbreak held everyone in awe. As she hit the climactic notes, the audience jumped to their feet in a thunderous ovation. Amanda Holden said what millions were thinking. I honestly think we were all being very cynical. I think that's the biggest wake-up call ever. Her words echoed around the globe. Susan Boyle had shattered expectations, not just with her voice, but with the truth that talent doesn't come in a specific package. That performance went viral overnight. The video spread like wildfire. Within 1 week, more than 25 million people had watched it. In just 9 days, that number hit 100 million. News outlets like CNN, the BBC, and the New York Times ran stories on her. Celebrities like Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher tweeted about her. By mid-April, Susan was the most talked about person on the internet. Video was being watched over 1 million times an hour. Susan's audition wasn't just a musical moment, it became a symbol of hope. A reminder that dreams don't expire with age, and that real talent often comes from the most unexpected places. She was invited to appear on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Media outlets from over 50 countries requested interviews. Her small church in Blackburn even became a tourist destination, with fans traveling from as far away as Japan just to see where she came from. Just weeks later, Susan returned for the Britain's Got Talent semi-finals. This time, she sang Memory from Cats. She was the final act of the night, and the pressure was immense. But when she began to sing, the magic returned. Her performance left the judges stunned once again. Amanda Holden called it absolutely brilliant. Susan received more votes than any other act that night, proving that her first audition had not been a fluke. As the final approached at the end of May, the world expected Susan to win. Betting agencies had her as the favorite. Her audition video had nearly 200 million views. In her hometown, people packed pubs and community centers to cheer her on. For the first time in the show's history, the final was streamed live online to meet the massive demand. Then came the shocking twist. When the votes were counted, Susan placed second. The winners were a dance group called Diversity. Millions of viewers around the world were stunned. In countries across the globe, people expressed disbelief. But even in that moment of loss, Susan remained gracious and composed. She hadn't won the competition, but she had already won something far greater. The hearts of people around the world. Despite coming in second on Britain's Got Talent, Susan remained gracious and kind. On live television, she congratulated the winners, saying the best people won. But, behind the scenes, the loss hit her harder than most fans realized. Rumors quickly began to circulate about Susan's behavior backstage. Some claimed she had stormed off yelling, "I hate this show." Others said she'd poured water on someone and argued with hotel staff. People close to Susan insisted many of these stories were exaggerated. But it was clear that the pressure had taken its toll. Just a few days later, the country woke up to shocking news. Susan had been admitted to a private clinic in London, a hospital, often used by celebrities and members of the royal family, for discreet care. Nearly 20 million people had watched her lose the final. And that emotional blow triggered what doctors later called an emotional breakdown. She was reportedly overwhelmed, crying, shouting at producers, even fainting. Paramedics were called. The official diagnosis: exhaustion. Her fame had skyrocketed overnight. Her audition video had become one of the most watched clips in internet history. Even Britain's Prime Minister sent her well wishes. But while the world cheered her success, the media went into a frenzy. Tabloids printed invasive stories about her mental health. One journalist even pretended to propose marriage just to get a reaction from her. The media watchdog group in the UK stepped in to warn news outlets to respect her privacy, especially considering the sensitivity of her mental health. For many, this became a turning point, a wake-up call about the dangers of sudden fame and the responsibilities that come with media power. Even Simon Cowell admitted the industry had gone too far. For the first time ever, he told a finalist they didn't have to join the show's live tour if they weren't ready. Susan's family was grateful. Simon later described it as one of the most difficult weeks of his life and accepted full responsibility. His decision would help change how reality shows treated contestants, especially those facing mental health challenges. Despite everyone expecting her to stay in recovery, Susan surprised the world again. Just 3 days later, she announced she would join the tour after all. She later spoke about that dark time, recalling how lost she felt in the clinic. With no phone, no TV, and no familiar faces, she doubted everything. But after a couple of days of rest, she realized she wasn't broken, just exhausted. Her choice to return to the stage became a symbol of strength. And return she did. Susan performed in 20 out of 24 shows on the Britain's Got Talent tour, visiting cities like Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Dublin, Sheffield, Coventry, and Birmingham. Audiences greeted her with standing ovations. Critics said she looked like a seasoned professional. The tour wasn't just a success, it was a triumph. In November 2009, she released her debut album, I Dreamed a Dream. The response was staggering. In just 1 week, she sold over 400,000 copies in the UK, breaking the record previously set by Leona Lewis. In the US, she sold more than 700,000 albums that same week, the biggest debut for a solo female artist since tracking began in the early 90s globally. The album sold over 2 million copies in its first week. By the end of 2009, Susan had sold over 10 million albums, outselling global stars like Eminem, Rihanna, and Lady Gaga. Amazon declared it their most pre-ordered album of all time. Some stores couldn't keep it on shelves, and the success didn't stop there. In the next 2 years, Susan made history again, becoming the first woman in UK chart history to have 3 consecutive albums debut at #1. I Dreamed a Dream, It's a Gift, and Someone to Watch Over Me. Only legendary bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones had achieved something similar. And Susan did it all in her late 40s. To no formal training and no flashy marketing campaign. The Gift even reached #1 in both the UK and US simultaneously, first for any female artist. By 2021, Susan had sold over 25 million albums. Worldwide, her debut alone accounted for 10 million of those sales. Her records went multi-platinum in countries like the US, UK, Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. In the US, I Dreamed a Dream was certified 4 times platinum. In the UK, 7 times platinum. She was invited to sing Mole of Kintyre at Windsor Castle for Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee, performing alongside the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards. Susan Boyle was no longer just a household name. She was a national treasure. Financially, her rise was just as dramatic. In her first year of fame, she earned the equivalent of over $8 million. Before that, she had lived in a modest, government-supported home in Blackburn, relying on disability benefits. By the end of 2009, her debut album alone had generated over $9 million in sales. And her net worth soon rose to between $35 and $40 million. But fame and fortune brought new challenges. Susan's sudden wealth caused tensions within her family. One of the most public incidents involved her brother Jerry, who reportedly threatened self-harm unless she gave him $50,000 to save his business. Susan gave him the money, but later told others she had been blackmailed, something Jerry denied. The lie deepened family divisions. Things worsened when Susan gifted another family member a large sum of money. When they failed to thank her, she sent several upset messages, which were reported as harassment. Police visited Susan and advised her to stop contacting the person. Over the years, she had given her family nearly $2 million, but instead of bringing them closer, it seemed to drive them further apart. Health-wise, Susan faced more hurdles. She was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and warned by doctors that she needed to make serious lifestyle changes or risk losing her voice. She adjusted her diet and eventually lost over 50 pounds. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Doctors warned her that even a mild illness could be life-threatening. She followed lockdown rules carefully, remaining isolated. But amidst all the hardship, there was also a bright spot. Susan found love for the first time. At age 53, during a U.S. tour, she met a kind doctor in Florida. He didn't know much about her music, but recognized her face and struck up a friendly conversation. That connection grew into something meaningful, though she kept the relationship private. It was a special and long-awaited part of her life. Despite global fame and millions in earnings, Susan stayed grounded. She continued living in the same small house in Blackburn, where she had grown up. She bought it for just $65,000. Later purchased the neighboring house for more space, still a modest upgrade. She spent little on herself, rarely more than a few $100s a week, and often did her own shopping. Then, in April 2022, Susan suffered a stroke. It affected her speech and nearly stole her voice. For over a year, she fought to recover. It was a long, painful journey, but she made it back. In June 2023, Susan returned to the Britain's Got Talent stage once again. And there in front of a live audience, she sang I Dreamed a Dream, the song that had changed her life. As the first notes filled the theater, the audience rose to their feet, many in tears. It was more than a performance. It was a full-circle moment, proof of her strength, her resilience, and the voice that the world almost never heard. People in the audience cried. Judges were visibly emotional, since Simon Cowell, who had first doubted her all those years ago, called it the most moving performance he had ever witnessed. That moment wasn't just about music, it was about triumph. Susan had done the impossible. She had fought her way back from the edge and reclaimed her voice. But her recovery wasn't easy or quick. For nearly 3 years after her stroke, Susan trained relentlessly. She worked with speech therapists, vocal coaches, and physical therapists to rebuild strength in her left side and restore her vocal ability. Every day was a battle. But by early 2025, after more than 1,000 hours of dedicated effort, Susan had regained an estimated 90% of her voice. It was nothing short of a miracle then. On April 1st, her 64th birthday, Susan broke her 2-year silence on social media. She posted a simple, heartfelt message. I'm back. Definitely back. Thank you for waiting. You music, you dreams, you beginnings. The internet lit up, and the post quickly received over 500,000 likes and 50,000 comments from fans around the world, many of whom had been quietly waiting, hoping, praying for her return. She didn't stop there. Susan followed her message with updates on upcoming projects. A new documentary chronicling her life in recovery, a charity single supporting stroke survivors, and plans for live performances. Ouch. She even posted behind the scenes videos, raw clips showing her earliest vocal exercises after the stroke, joyful team rehearsals, and quiet moments of reflection. This was the comeback fans had dreamed of. After years of silence, Susan Boyle, the woman who once stepped onto a stage as an unknown voice from a small village in Scotland, was ready to sing again, not just as a performer, but as a survivor, a fighter, and a symbol of hope. Now the world waits once more, not in doubt, but in awe, because Susan Boyle isn't just back, she's stronger than ever.